the honorable examiners, internal and external examiners in the University of Al Jazeera for the discussion of my thesis for the PhD. My CV is as follows. My name, Sabri Wani PhD, graduated from Omdurman Islamic University, Faculty of Sharia and Law, 1998. In 2001, I joined Ministry of Justice after obtaining the bar examination. I worked as a public prosecution attorney for quite a period of time in Sinar, and then also in Juba in 2002, and in 2007 I worked as a senior public prosecution attorney and the deputy head of legal administration of Northern Bahar Ghazal State in South Sudan. I resigned from Ministry of Justice of Sudan in 2008 and integrated into the Ministry of Justice of South Sudan in 2008. And in 2011, I was redeployed back to the National Ministry of Justice and appointed as the Deputy Director of Public Prosecution till 2020. In 2020, I was appointed as the head of legal administration for Central Equatorial State, Juba, for 4 years. Thereafter, I was also redeployed to the National Ministry of Justice and appointed as the legal advisor of the South Sudan Financial Intelligence Unit, at the same time as the co-chair for National Task Force for Combating Trafficking in Person and Smuggling of Migrants, and the legal advisor of the Ministry of Public Service, Human Resource Development. I published like 2 articles as a requirement of this PhD. The one of them is about assessment of anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist acts. This is in 2024. As a result, the government of the Republic of Sudan adopted my recommendation and processed and endorsed the amendment of the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing of 2012 in 2024 October. That means after months from my first publication. Thereafter also I contributed in the enhancements of the law by recommending series of regulations. And in 2025 March, I published a second article about enhancements of the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorists. Also, I contributed in the ratification of the 3 important conventions: the Palermo Conventions, the Transnational Organized Crime of 2000, and then also the Convention for Combating Terrorist Financing, and also the Convention for Combating Illicit Dealing in Narcotics and Drugs. It was my legal opinions and my contribution led into the ratification of this convention. In addition to that, also, I proposed to the Minister of Interior a draft bill on anti-trafficking in person bill 2024, and we carried out the required consultations, and the bill was validated with the help of the UNODC and was submitted to the Ministry of Justice for further drafting. Thereafter will be submitted to the Council of Ministers, among other contributions in the system. I will be giving this presentation in 3 parts. The first part is about the thesis and the importance of this study, and also the objective I want to achieve, and the methodology that I use. And I will conclude in the last part with the importance finding, as well as the importance recommendation. For this thesis, thesis examines South Sudan laws on anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist act. It focused on the 2012 Act and its 2024 amendment, and also focus on their alignment with the Financial Action Task Force standard, as well as challenge encountered by the post-conflict nation like South Sudan. The research aimed to harmonize South Sudan's anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist regime with the global standards, despite institutional, legal, and technological obstacles in the country. The same also, the study employs black letter and then also legal analysis and a comparative legal approach and an examination of international treaties and the Financial Action Task Force recommendation as the methodology that had been used by the researcher. The key finding is that reveal legislative intent aligning with the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations, yet implementation gaps persist, including one of them is a weak financial intelligence unit's capacity, then also inadequate designated non-financial business profession supervision, and also we encountered with the vulnerabilities in the real estate and the absence of the beneficial ownership data in regard to the companies registered in the Ministry of Justice. There is some of recommendations that have been proposed by the researcher, comprised of domesticating and enforcing international treaties that have been ratified by the country as the anti-money laundering counter-financing instruments. Another recommendation is about completing the national risk assessment that had been conducted by the country, so that it will be widely disseminated and even awareness will be taken so that the financial institution will be assessing about the risk of money laundering and terrorist financing and start reporting suspicious transaction. Then again, also a recommendation establishing a centralized beneficial ownership register in the Ministry of Justice, because we don't have it now in the Ministry of Justice. In addition to that, enhancing cross-border cooperations with the other countries, and at the same time investing in the technology for risk-based supervisions and also for financial intelligence unit operation. This thesis examine and brief is the South Sudan anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist system. And this is based, number one, on the Financial Action Task Force recommendation. Number two, it is focused on the operational independence of the Financial Intelligence Unit in terms of to propose regulations on or regulations of the digital assets and also decentralized finance, and the inadequate of a system for the legal assistance and also asset recovery, because it is identified as a gap. So the research recommends adopting regulatory technology, which is abbreviated by RegTech tools, and then also implementing what the national risk assessment recommendation, because one of these recommendations is that the amendment of the law, which now materialize. We also recommend that there should be like enhancing the regional cooperation, and this will be through Eastern and South Africa anti-money laundering and the money laundering group, which is abbreviated SEMELAC, so that the country is aligning with the immediate outcome of 6, and immediate outcome 7, immediate outcome 10 of the Financial Action Task Force methodologies for assessing the countries. At the same time, enacting urgent reforms to avoid the country being blacklisted, because we will be evaluated. The first evaluation of the country will be conducted in 2029. So the key research questions for this thesis is 3. One of them is that to what extent does the South Sudan anti-money laundering legal framework enable financial institutions and at the same time reporting entity in the country to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. And as a result of the amendment, now the number of the reporting entity is increased, and even the law recognized establishment of the competent authorities, establishment of the supervisory authorities, and as well as a specialized unit. This also was a recommendation before in my first publication. Second question is that, do the provision of the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing Terrorist Act of 2012, which amended in 2024, comply with the Financial Action Task Force recommendation? And this is proved through the research that is partially compliance, because the other is the needle who are the regulations and also the effectiveness and the proof in the delivery. So the third question is about what are the key legal institutional and technological gaps, and what reforms are required to address them. This will be in my conclusion. I will be giving 10 plus finding plus 5 or 6 recommendation to answer the third question. The significance of this study is that this study focused on the South Sudan vulnerability to money laundering and terrorist financing, which impact on the state authority, and also impact the financial integrity of the country, and impact also the national security of the country. So the study tried to address the institutional vulnerability that comprise anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist enforcement. So the study helps improve or recommend to help improve laws and also policies. This is through examining the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing Terrorist Act of 2012, amended in 2024. By comparing it to the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations and offering important insight before the South Sudan Financial Action Task Force review or the mutual evaluation in 2029. So the study fills a research gap, because we don't have a lot of people who have been write or written in this area, and also support law enforcement and policy, and propose technology basis innovation. This is also by to enhance issues of monitoring, to enhance compliance, to enhance enforcement of the money laundering rules and regulations. The study also contribute to the legal and institutional reform, recommending a legal harmonization, recommending capacity building, development of jurisprudence, and also clarifications of the institutional standard. So the study has the implication for governance and the public policy. And these implications such as public sector oversight and the physical transparency and restoration of the civic trust, unlocking aid and investment, and interagency and donor coordination. So this study is not just a critique. So it is like a strategic roadmap that combines the legal doctrine and institutional reform and technological innovation with the idea to support the South Sudan transformation from reactive compliance to proactive resilience in the global anti-money laundering and counter-financing system. So within legal doctrine, institutional reform, and technological innovation to aid South Sudan in transitioning from reactive compliance to proactive resilience in the global anti-money laundering and counter-financing system. So we can conclude the objective of the study like this. We can say this study for this thesis analyzes the South Sudan laws, particularly the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing Terrorist Act, and analyze the system to prevent money laundering and terrorist financing, specifically focusing on the 2012 and the amendment of 2024 and their compliance with the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendation and also international laws, and their enforcements in light of South Sudan unstable circumstances. In addition to that, the study aimed to address a notable information gap, as I mentioned, regarding the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist policy for the fragile states, and fostering collaboration among various agencies, shaping the national anti-money laundering strategy, and ensuring alignment with the Financial Action Task Force immediate outcome methodologies that are using for assessing of the countries. Furthermore, the study aims to develop a comprehensive plan to enhance the South Sudan's capacity to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. So this includes aligning laws of the country with the Financial Action Task Force and also with the UN United Nations standard, restructuring the institution, whether the competent authorities, whether the reporting persons, whether the supervisory authorities, whether the financial intelligence unit, and adopting technology such as RegTech and AI, and also eKYC, know your client, and providing also training as a recommendation for the prosecutors, for the investigators of the financial crimes, and then compliance team in the reporting entities, because you have to have compliant officer, and enhancing the regional cooperation through the SMLF, who are the East and Southern African Anti-Money Laundering groups. So finally, in regard to the objective of the study, we can say that the study is important. Why? It is important and it is needed at right time because it's providing a clear plan to help the country, the South Sudan, to help the South Sudan improve from being formally compliant, as stated, but functionally weak, to become or to being risk-based, intelligence-led, and institutionally strong. This is our aim to achieve through the recommendation that we'll be providing through this research. This will be by also addressing these issues. So if we address these issues that identified as a weakness, as the gaps, and we adopt the recommendation that have been provided through this thesis, I can say South Sudan can move beyond the legal critique and develop a national anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist strategy. A strategy that advances the financial integrity and the national sovereignty and the global compliance. This is in brief about the objective of this study. So yes, we can add that for the researcher throughout the thesis and the study, adapt in particular a comparative legal approach to extract reform lessons from other developing and also post-conflict jurisdictions so that we can benefit also from their experience. So the research offers analytic framework and also reform-oriented insight designed to support the policy discussion and academic engagement, and acknowledging institutional fragility and political constraints in South Sudan. So, the research seeks to make a valuable contribution to discussion about improving anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism laws in the weak states, aiming for a legal system that is a clear, legal system that is strong and up to date with the technology, while also fitting the specific situation in South Sudan. So the final goal is to serve as a transformative blueprint for the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorists, legal and institutional reform in South Sudan, grounded in international best practice and the regional development needs. So this research or this thesis uses doctrinal and comparative legal methodology to evaluate the South Sudan Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing Terrorism Act of 2012, Amendment 2024. So the research framework is based on the black letter law tradition and focusing on the textual analysis of the statutory instrument. And then the study aligned with the Financial Action Task Force, our 40 recommendation, and follow the importance principle or model of transformation model of the treaty domestication. The methodology components so include, in brief, a doctrinal analysis, this is number one. Number two, a comparative legal analysis. Number three, a legal transplant theory, and a normative and interpretive approaches. So the research is based on the secondary data from international treaties, legal instruments, Financial Action Task Force, mutual evaluation reports, and the national laws and academic commentaries, policy report, whether from the East Africa and Southeast and South Africa anti-money laundering groups, the United Nations, and the World Bank. So this research has a limitation. And this limitation, such as the no primary field work or no empirical surveys. And there is also limited access to internal government anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism enforcement data, because there is no data even. That's why we recommend that the future research direction will be conducted that will include empirical studies incorporating suspicious transaction report data, because we failed to get it, because we still yet establishing all over the system. At the same time, also prosecution and conviction rates, because there is no single conviction rate observed, and asset recovery outcomes, because also there is absence of the regulations or legal framework for asset recovery. That's why it's provided under some of the provision in the amendment, and institutional capacity assessment. So this research concludes that it blends a strong legal analysis within the insight from different policies, connects the differences or the difference between the following the rules and actual putting them into practice, and offer a plan for improving South Sudan anti-money laundering, counter-financing terrorist system through the change in laws and better team among institutional and the use of the technology. So we can conclude that the limitation of this research is appeared, as mentioned before, encompasses restriction, as I mentioned, access to empirical data, and also institutional and the legal obstacles, and undeveloped or underdeveloped scholarly literature we did not find, and a lack of a field visit, as I mentioned, empirical method, and challenging in the assessing effectiveness. Now we are coming to the key finding of this research, but let me give this statement that although significance has been made, this do not diminish the relevancy or the potential impact of this research. So because this research fills the legal policy gap in the country, in particular also in the fragile states, anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist reform, and the research provides a platform for the future empirical studies. It offers practical recommendation to legislators and also regulators and international partners, and it supports academic discourse and policy developments in the post-conflict financial governance like South Sudan. We are concluding to the summary of the key finding and thereafter the recommendation. To be into the topic, I can say there is like 10 plus finding. One of these finding, our finding number one, is that the 2024 amendment, or the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorists, the amendment that come as a result of the research efforts that have been published in 2024 March, we can say that the new amendment extended or expanded the definitions of the crimes of the predicate offenses. Instead of limited to 19, now it has become any offense that can be convicted by not less than 6 months. So, expanded the definition of the crime related to money laundering, improve rules for checking customer identities, and made important aspect of the terrorist financing illegal, following the guidelines set by the Financial Action Task Force recommendation and the United Nations Convention. We observe that South Sudan ratified fundamental treaties such as the Vienna Convention of 1988, the Palermo Convention for Combating Transnational Organized Crime in 2000, and the Terrorist Financing 1999 in 2024, all of them. The second finding, institutional reforms, include the promotion of the Financial Intelligence Unit. Instead of Intergovernmental Administrative Unit, now it's upgraded to be an independent. But it lacks operational independence and sufficient funding and technical expertise. And we observe that supervisory agencies still encounter restricted coordination, inadequate oversight capacity, inconsistent enforcement of suspicious transaction report. The same also asset recovery and the risk-based compliance measures. The absence of the centralized anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist database resulted in the fragment and the unreliable suspicious transaction report and the asset recovery statistic. The said finding, the researcher observed that regional and international comparison show successful use of the AI-based compliance tool. At the same time, also successful for interagency coordination and successful of cooperation and coordination with the Egmont groups, cooperation, and the international judicial precedents emphasize the value of the prosecutorial autonomy and judicial oversight. But when you come to South Sudan, you find both currently lacking in South Sudan. Researcher also, as a finding, observed that the thematic and policy insight indicate that there must be a shift from a reactive legal stance to a proactive, intelligence-driven enforcement model. So, key recommendations include institutional coordination and technological integration and legal refinement, capacity building, and international cooperation is recommended. The 2024 amendment provides the legal authority for both conviction-based and non-conviction-based, which was not in the 2011 Act. So now we have a conviction-based and non-conviction-based confiscation of the money laundering offenses. And this is in line with the Palermo Convention. However, these powers remain underutilized due to the institutional fragmentation and the lack of a trained personnel. Because it is observed as a researcher, South Sudan lacks a dedicated asset recovery agents and does not have a centralized database on asset recovery and seizure or a forfeiture cases. The finding number 6, outdated system, insufficient funding, and inconsistent suspicious transaction report submission from reporting institution limited the role and functions of the Financial Intelligence Unit. The Financial Intelligence Unit must shift toward data-driven, intelligence-led operational with the regional cooperation throughout the CEMELAC, East and South African anti-money laundering groups, and the Egmont Group. This is a recommendation given to the Financial Intelligence Unit. When we come to the supervisory authorities, it is a finding that supervisory authorities and oversight system are inadequate, as the South Sudan does not have a central supervisory coordination mechanism. And many regulators in the country rely on mutual, fragmented oversight tools. And a third party, CDD practice, remain unregulated. And this is posing risk in the sectors, such as sectors of who are real estate sectors and currency exchange. So there is no any reporting from these sectors, and a lot of money is being laundered through Alua third party using Alua real estate agencies, and at the end there's a government revenue being lost without any reporting and without any accountability. The finding number 8, the national risk assessment conducted by the country and the implementation of the immediate outcome. Immediate outcome number 1, immediate outcome number 6, immediate outcome number 8, number 10 of the FATF Financial Action Task Force methodologies identified a significant internal threat, but did not offer a thorough analysis of the high-risk sectors. So, immediate outcome benchmark, especially immediate outcome 6, on how well the Financial Intelligence Unit can work. The immediate outcome 8, we talk about the recovering of assets. And the immediate outcome 10, we talk about enforcing laws against the terrorist financing. It is a researcher, opinion that have not been fully met by the country or are only partially achieved. Finding number 9, the researchers conclude that South Sudan is legally on the path to Financial Action Task Force compliance, but without a strong enforcement mechanism, without functional outcomes, this will not materialize. So, is the researcher opinion that a coordinated and ethical and technologically enabled anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist strategies is essential. This is to protect the national integrity and to ensure international credibility of the country, and also to build the public trust in financial government. 10. South Sudan has made a significant legislative progress. It is correct, particularly throughout the 2024 amendment of the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing Terrorism Act, and even the ratification of the relevant convention. But it is the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism system remains incomplete and under enforced. So the gaps between adhering to a statutory requirement and the functionality of the institutional process significant challenge to Financial Action Task Force delisting the integrity of the financial system and global cooperation. First measures involve establishing, and this is as a recommendation to the country. The country should, number one, establish asset recovery agency, and also transitioning the financial intelligence unit and oversight procedure to online platform with a centralized anti-money laundering database and automate suspicious transaction report, which is still undergoing progress, but is not yet concluded by the financial intelligence unit. In addition to that, also countries should create a dedicated unit for the prosecuting and financial offenses, regulating a third-party customer due diligence, in particular in issues of the real estate, and promoting a cross-border collaboration with other countries, signing memorandum of understanding, conducting a technical training session with the similar East and Southern African anti-money laundering groups, and ensuring parliamentary oversight by the Parliament and annual public reports, and also mandate transparency through the legislation. 11. The 2024 amendment provides the legal authority for the investigations and prosecutions and non-conviction-based confiscation, as I mentioned before. However, South Sudan lacks a specialized financial crime prosecution unit, and this is a recommendation to the Minister of Justice to establish. And then also lack a forensic capacity and the national case management system, which also has a recommendation for the country to establish. And also lack a prosecution rates for the money laundering and terrorist financing, because it is still remain negligible. So public awareness is recommended, and capacity building and training. So the regime in South Sudan remains symbolic unless supported by the real-time tracking and the regional cooperation and the institutional integrity. 12. Preventative measures for the financial institution are now required under the new act or the amendment to apply what is called risk-based approaches, and also to conduct customer due diligence and verify beneficial ownership. However, enforcement in this area is hindered by the limited digital infrastructure in the country, and also a lack of behavioral analytics and regulatory delays. So, customer due diligence and information management financial institutions are now required to apply, as I mentioned, the risk-based approaches, and also to conduct the customer due diligence to verify beneficial owners. However, implementation deficiencies include, like, there is still working with the manual processes, and there is absence of the digital monitoring system, and porous border, and also relying on the informal network. 14, we can say it, as regard to the transaction monitoring suspicious activities report and the record keeping, the 2024 amendment mandate enhanced due diligence for the politically exposed persons, individuals who are PEPs. And the good things about this law, now they include the domestic politically exposed person, which was not in the previous act, and now there is like requirement of enhanced due diligence and also customer due diligence, enhanced customer due diligence. So high risk jurisdiction also under this law, and the correspondent banking relationship, all of them are required and to be when you deal with them to carry enhanced due diligence. So outsource CDD, customer due diligence, expose the system to the regulatory arbitrage, robust digital infrastructure, and the legal clarity are urgently needed. So South Sudan anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorists enforcement system is structurally weak. This is one of the conclusions, and fragmented with the lack of the risk-based supervision, inadequate human capital, and poor interagency coordination, and the weak judicial enforcement. So the study found that the updated act, or the 2024, now allow for the disclosure of who really owns the company. So now the Ministry of Justice should establish who are the beneficial ownership and who are registration, because the law really know who owns the company, regulates non-profit organizations, and encourage sharing of the data between the different sectors. However, real-time access and the interagency integrations remain weak, and even the non-profit organization oversight mechanism are introduced, but yet the monitoring remains limited. And this is due to the political sensitivity and institutional reach. I can conclude the finding by saying the study also found that the South Sudan has ratified the major conventions and adapt the mutual legal assistance provision under all this convention. Now it is provided under the amendment and also under the bill for anti-trafficking in person bill of 2024, waiting and who are endorsement by the Council of Ministers. However, while the national coordination mechanism are theoretically established, but in real sense there is no, and also cross-agency collaboration remain weak. So the country underutilize extradition, the asset recovery tools. So comparatively, countries like Nigeria and like UK have achieved a success through operational of mutual legal assistance frameworks and also asset recovery treaties. But South Sudan lacks the capacity and the procedural clarity to respond to the international requests efficiently. Therefore, the 2024 amendment greatly improved the rules for the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism, and these include, as I mentioned before, adding more who are crime as considered money laundering that can be prosecuted, and regulating also for the first time the visual asset service providers, and is strengthening oversight. But it is observed that, however, the financial intelligence unit is under resources, and also the designated non-financial business profession supervision is minimal, and interagencies integration remain poor. So the country lacks judicial precedence. The country having delaying the evolution of the anti-money laundering jurisprudence. The researcher affirmed legislative progress, but identified a systematic lack of institutional independences, the digital system, the prosecutorial capacity, informal financial system, such as Hawala and what is called Sarafa, they still remain outside the scope of the regulation and perpetuating Alua money laundering risk or making Alua money laundering risk. The final finding is that a strategic recommendation that include institutional capacity building, that include judiciary and prosecutorial reforms, legal and regulatory reforms, visual assets and informal sectors, regulations, public-private engagement, awareness and education, and regional cooperation and peer engagement. This recommendation provided by the researcher and is aimed to improve the transparency, aimed to improve and reduce the corruptions, and to promote the institutional resilience and the risk-based enforcement, as well as technological modernization. So we can conclude by giving the key policy recommendation of this thesis as follows. Number one, the doctoral research focus on the strategic recommendation for strengthening South Sudan anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist framework. So this recommendation, as I consider, is strategic, including Alhua setting up an independent financial intelligence unit, updating and aligning all laws related to anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorists, putting into action a national plan for the country that targeted financial sanctions of the UN and also financing of the weapon, improving cooperation between the financial intelligence and the law enforcement, creating a national asset recovery, whether agency, whether commission, whether unit, using a tiered risk-based approach for the higher risk sectors, enhancing international cooperation and treaty commitment, as well as using technology in the anti-money laundering and counter-financing framework. The strategic recommendation number two, the research also stress the importance of institutional and technological modernization as a legal alignment. So South Sudan anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist transformation depends on building resilient institutions, fostering cross-border collaboration, and integrating international best practice within its unique post-conflict context. 3. The thesis concludes that although South Sudan 2024 legislative reform aligns significantly with the Financial Action Task Force standard, implementation remains weak and fragmented, functional effectiveness, not merely formal compliance. So, is the benchmark for the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist success. So it is very important to note that without judicial leadership, technological integration, proactive cross-agency enforcement, the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist framework risk becoming symbolic. To transition South Sudan from fragility to financial integrity and international credibility, the researcher recommend a risk-based, data-driven, and also the institutionally anchored approach. 4. The research also recommend establishing an anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorist training institute. This will be offer the ongoing education for the judges, for the prosecutors, for compliant officers who will be appointed in the reporting entities, and the custom official who will be reporting on who are smuggling of the cash through the borders or through the airport. Therefore, it is also suggested by the researcher connecting the national risk assessment to actionable policy reform, sectors, regulation, and budget allocation. Before the end, we can say the researcher focus on institutional strengthening and the risk management in South Sudan with the short to medium terms focusing to 6 and 24 months. For example, the recommendations suggesting putting the financial intelligence unit into action, creating national rules and guidelines for anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorists, improving regulations on who truly owns the companies, setting up internal compliance system, using the real-time monitoring tools, and sharing the updated definition of the politically exposed person. This is recommendation mainly for the financial intelligence unit. For enforcement and international cooperation, the recommendation also include administrative sanctions to be carried out, and also recommend the whistleblowers and protection framework to be carried out or to be regulated, and also recommended that the mutual legal assistance and asset recovery laws and regional corporations and implementations of the FATF and ICRG recommendation to be implemented. Therefore, training and capacity building are also essential with the partnerships with the Ministry of Justice and also with the international bodies. Additionally, the researcher recommends that the government adapt digital analysis tools and also launch a public awareness campaign and aim at the financial actors, medias, and the civil society. Finally, we can say the researcher is suggesting that a sequence risk-based and cooperative formal cooperative reform strategy is essential, drawing on the model of Nigeria and the model of Kenya and the model of UK. So South Sudan must focus on legislative precision, institutional autonomy, and intersectoral alignment to terrorism from symbolic compliance to practical enforcement. So supplementary measures to reinforce anti-money laundering effectiveness include developing a comprehensive compliance framework, prohibiting the concealment of the politically exposed person's asset, integrating a national sanction list into institutional screen system, securing technical assistance depending regional cooperation, strengthening stakeholder training, legitimizing mutual legal assistance and asset recovery framework, enhancing international compliance, measuring, prioritizing sectorial risk, expanding the politically exposed persons definition, and now already expanded, and dissemination campaign, amending the penal code, and planning strategically, and raising awareness and modernization of ICT infrastructure. In conclusion, I can say that the research highlights the importance of the institutional and technological modernizations in strengthening South Sudan anti-money laundering framework. And this is by implementing this recommendation. So if the country implement all the recommendations set above, South Sudan can transition from fragility to financial integrity and international credibility, ensuring the country continue progress in combating money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. In addition, the thesis conclude that only through harmonization of the legal reforms, interagency integration, digital transformation, can South Sudan fulfill the Financial Action Task Force expectation and avoid reputational and financial consequence associated with gray list or blacklisting. Thank you very much.